Everyone knows the Hookman legend is fake. That's what I used to believe, until I found proof that someone tried to erase its true history. You see, I never meant to stumble into this nightmare. That night, 3 months ago, I was just another amateur folklore researcher, scrolling through dusty corners of the internet at 3 a.m. The soft glow of my laptop screen illuminated stacks of books about urban legends scattered across my desk. I'd read hundreds of these stories before, each one more outlandish than the last. But something about the Hookman kept drawing me back. The legend itself seemed simple enough. A murderer with a hook for a hand terrorizing young couples at lovers' lanes. We've all heard it. But as I dug deeper into a forgotten forum thread from 2003, I found something that made my blood run cold. User TruthSeeker85 had posted detailed accounts of Hookman sightings that didn't match any version I'd ever encountered. These weren't just teenagers making out in parked cars. These were isolated incidents spanning decades, each featuring a tall, shadowy figure whose hook wasn't a weapon, but something far more ancient. My hands trembled as I followed the thread. TruthSeeker85 had connected these sightings to a series of unexplained disappearances across the American Midwest. Their last post abruptly ended mid-sentence, and their account had been inactive ever since. The forum itself had been abandoned, preserved only through an old web archive. But what truly shook me to my core was what I found next. A digitized newspaper article from 1952, buried in a small-town historical society's database. The headline read, "Local man claims ancient guardian returns." The article described a figure matching the Hookman's description. But here's the thing. This was decades before the first official Hookman sighting was ever reported. The journalist who wrote the piece, Sarah Henderson, had included detailed interviews with witnesses who described seeing a tall figure with what they called a curved appendage watching over their town during a series of mysterious events. The article mentioned photographs and additional evidence, but when I tried to find follow-up stories, there were none. It was as if someone had methodically erased every trace of this version of events. What disturbed me most wasn't just the article's content. It was the fact that it existed at all. You see, according to every official source, the Hookman legend didn't emerge until the late 1960s. The story we all know was supposedly inspired by a series of murders in California. But this article proved that the entity people called the Hookman had been around long before that. As I stared at my screen that night, a notification popped up. Someone had tried to edit the archive, attempting to remove the article I was reading. In the seconds before the page refreshed, I managed to save a copy. When I tried to access it again, the article was gone, replaced by a 404 error. That's when I realized someone was actively monitoring and removing these traces of the true story, and now they knew I had found it. Looking back, I should have stopped there, should have closed my laptop and walked away. But I couldn't, because in that moment, as my cursor hovered over the saved file of that vanished article, I realized I had stumbled onto something bigger than a simple urban legend. Something that powerful people had worked very hard to keep hidden. And now, as I share this with you, I know they're watching. But you need to know the truth about what I discovered, about what the Hookman really is, and why its story has been systematically erased from our history. The deleted article sent me spiraling into the darkest corners of historical archives I could access. What I found there changed everything I thought I knew about the Hookman legend. In the basement of the State Library, buried under stacks of microfilm reels, I discovered newspaper clippings dating back to 1847 that described a figure that couldn't possibly be human. They called it the Night Watcher, a towering shadow that stalked the edges of small frontier towns, its right arm ending in what witnesses described as a curved extension of impossible length. These weren't isolated incidents. As I cross-referenced dates and locations, a chilling pattern emerged. Every major Hookman sighting coincided with periods of significant social unrest or impending disaster. But here's the detail that made my skin crawl. In each case, the disappearances started exactly 3 weeks before any major catastrophe struck these communities. I spent weeks piecing together missing persons reports from across the country. The official records were fragmented, but the similarities were undeniable. Between 1920 and 1975 alone, I found 147 cases that followed the same pattern. Young adults, usually between 18 and 25, would vanish without a trace. The only common thread? Each had reported seeing a tall figure watching them from a distance in the days leading up to their disappearance. Then I found the photographs. They were tucked away in an unmarked envelope in the archives of a defunct paranormal research society. Most were too damaged to make out clearly, but 3 of them made my blood freeze. The first, taken in Milwaukee in 1932, showed a street scene at night. In the background, partially obscured by fog, stood a figure that had to be at least 8 feet tall. Its right arm extended far beyond natural proportions, ending in what looked like a curved blade, or perhaps something older, more primal. The second photo, from 1954, captured a similar figure standing atop a water tower in New Mexico. But what caught my attention wasn't the figure itself. It was the strange symbols etched into the metal structure beneath it. I would see these same symbols again, much later, in places I never expected. The third photo nearly caused me to quit my research entirely. Dated 1967, it showed the interior of an abandoned factory. The figure was closer to the camera this time, its form more distinct. What I had initially thought was a hook, it wasn't metal at all. It looked organic, like it was growing from the entity's arm, curved and segmented in ways that defied natural biology. But the photos weren't the most disturbing part of my investigation. It was the survivors' stories that truly shook me. I managed to track down 7 people who claimed to have encountered the entity and lived to tell about it. Each told a radically different version of events, yet certain details remained eerily consistent. Maria Vasquez, now 82, encountered it in rural Texas in 1956. She described how it seemed to shift between shadows, its form never quite solid. "It wasn't hunting us," she whispered during our interview, her hands shaking as she clutched her coffee cup. "It was selecting. There's a difference." James Cohen, a retired police officer from Oregon, had a different perspective. His encounter in 1973 left him convinced that what we call the Hookman wasn't a single entity at all. "I saw 3 of them," he insisted, his voice trembling despite his professional demeanor. "They moved in perfect synchronization, like they were connected by something we couldn't see." But it was Sarah Mitchell's account from 1989 that truly changed my understanding of what we were dealing with. She didn't just see the entity, she claimed it communicated with her. The message she received haunted me for weeks. "We are the shepherds of necessary ends." As I dug deeper into these accounts, I began to notice something else, a pattern of interference. Surviving witnesses would suddenly change their stories, official records would vanish, and entire sections of archives would be inexplicably lost or damaged. Someone or something was actively working to obscure the truth. But they couldn't erase everything, and what remained pointed to something far more ancient and terrifying than a simple urban legend about a hook-handed killer. What I didn't realize then was that by connecting these dots, I had inadvertently drawn attention to myself. The next phase of my investigation would bring the horror much closer to home, starting with a discovery about my own family that would shatter everything I thought I knew about our history. I never should have mentioned my research to my mother. The moment I described the curved appendage, her face went pale. She disappeared into the attic and returned with a leather-bound diary I'd never seen before. "Your grandmother made me promise," her voice cracked, "to give this to someone in the family who started asking the right questions." My grandmother, Clara's diary, started in 1943 when she was just 12 years old, revealed a truth that turned my blood to ice. The familiar cursive handwriting described a figure that had haunted her childhood in the small town of Mill Creek, Vermont. "The shadow man watches from the birch grove again," she wrote. "Mother says to ignore him, but I know he's chosen me. His arm curves like a question mark against the moon, and sometimes I hear him whispering names I don't understand." The entries grew more detailed over the months. Clara documented 7 distinct encounters, each one more chilling than the last. "Today he stood closer than ever," one entry read. "I saw what I thought was his hook isn't metal at all. It moves like a living thing, like it's trying to point to something I can't see yet. As I cross-referenced the dates in her diary with local newspaper archives, a horrifying pattern emerged. Every time my grandmother wrote about the Shadow Man, a child would vanish from a neighboring town. But here's what made me truly question everything. One entry described how she followed the entity to an ancient stone circle deep in the woods. The symbols she sketched in her diary matched exactly with the ones I'd found in my earlier research, symbols that predated the town's existence by centuries. The diary ended abruptly in December 1943 with a final entry that haunts me. He's shown me what's coming. The others like him, spread across the world, watching and waiting. We're not ready to understand their purpose, but someday someone in our bloodline will be. If you're reading this, you're the one they've chosen to know the truth. 3 days after that entry, 5 children disappeared from Mill Creek. The official record claimed they were victims of a blizzard, but my grandmother's diary told a different story. She wrote about hearing their voices in her dreams, calling out coordinates to places that wouldn't be discovered for decades. What terrifies me most isn't just that my grandmother encountered the same entity I'm researching, it's that she seemed to understand something about its true nature that she took to her grave. The diary's final pages contained a series of drawings, elaborate patterns that looked random at first, but when I overlaid them with maps of documented Hookman sightings across the century, they aligned perfectly. My mother finally confessed that Grandma Clara never spoke about that winter again, but every year on the anniversary of the disappearances, she would lock herself in her room and recite names in a language none of us recognized. I found recordings of these sessions hidden in a false bottom of the diary. The words she spoke match fragments of an ancient dialect I discovered in my research, one that linguists claim died out thousands of years ago. Last night, I found a previously hidden page stuck between the diary's cover and last page. In shaking handwriting, Clara wrote, "To my grandchild who finds this, they chose our bloodline centuries ago. The curve isn't a hook, it's a key. And now that you've started asking questions, they'll expect you to use it." I've started having the same dreams my grandmother described. The Shadow Man stands at the edge of my vision, his curved arm pointing towards something just beyond my understanding. But unlike her, I think I'm beginning to grasp what it's trying to show me, and why our family was chosen to carry this knowledge. This isn't just about uncovering the truth behind an urban legend anymore. Whatever the Hookman is, whatever its true purpose might be, my family has been intertwined with its existence for generations. And now, I'm starting to suspect that my research wasn't an accident. I was meant to find these answers, meant to piece together the dark history that my grandmother only glimpsed. But as I connect these generational dots, something else has become terrifyingly clear. I'm not just following this story anymore. I'm becoming part of it. My grandmother's diary led me to an anthropology professor who specialized in prehistoric cave art. The moment I showed her the symbols from the diary, she went silent. Then she pulled out a folder marked Classified, Project Shepherd, and spread dozens of photographs across her desk. They showed cave paintings from sites across the world, spanning thousands of years. Each one depicted the same impossible figure, a towering form with an elongated, curved appendage. The oldest painting dated back 15,000 years, discovered in a hidden chamber of the Lascaux Caves. But what the public hasn't seen is the chamber's ceiling, covered in mathematical sequences that perfectly predict astronomical events, including several that haven't happened yet. Next to these sequences were drawings of multiple curved figures standing in formation around what appeared to be human settlements. In the Nazca Desert, away from the famous lines, researchers found rock carvings showing these entities performing what appeared to be a ritual of selection. The carvings depicted them choosing specific individuals from groups of people, always before major catastrophic events. The same scenes appeared in Aboriginal Australian rock art, Native American pictographs, and African cave paintings. Always with the same pattern, always with multiple entities working in concert. Then I found the Vatican's sealed records from the Spanish Inquisition. They weren't hunting witches. They were tracking what they called Los Guardianes del Destino, the Guardians of Destiny. The curved appendages weren't weapons. They were tools for what the documents described as the great harvesting of souls before the times of necessary ending. But it was the pattern of modern sightings that finally revealed the terrifying truth. I created a timeline of confirmed Hookman encounters over the past century. 3 weeks before the Great Chicago Fire, 5 sightings. Days before the San Francisco earthquake, 12 sightings. Before every major disaster, every pivotal moment in history, they appeared. Not to cause these events, but to select those who would survive them. A classified military report from 1962 detailed Project Shepherd's findings. They had been tracking these entities since World War I, realizing that each one operated in a specific geographic region. The curved appendages weren't hooks at all. They were organic instruments that could somehow read the threads of human fate. The report was discontinued after the entire research team vanished, leaving behind only a cryptic message. They are not our enemies. They are our shepherds, and the culling is necessary. In a forgotten archive in Prague, I found photographs from the 1940s showing 3 distinct entities working in different parts of Europe. Each had slightly different markings, different patterns in their curved appendages, but they moved with unified purpose. They weren't monsters hunting victims. They were selecting survivors, choosing those who would carry humanity forward through its darkest hours. The symbols my grandmother drew matched an ancient text found in the Mongolian steppes. When translated, it revealed something chilling. The curved ones walk among us, wearing the shapes of our fears. They are many, yet one. They are the shepherds of the great cycle, choosing those who must survive to see the next turning of the wheel. I've spent months mapping their appearances throughout history. Each entity has its own territory, its own method of selection, but they all serve the same purpose. The Hookman legend isn't about a single murderer. It's humanity's collective memory of these ancient selectors, these guardians who appear before every great shift in human history to ensure our species survives its own destructive nature. The most terrifying part? I've found evidence of their selections increasing dramatically in the past year. Their territories are overlapping for the first time in recorded history. They're working together, moving with purpose, preparing for something. And based on the patterns I've uncovered, whatever they're preparing for is imminent. Last week I found a new cave painting that had been deliberately hidden. It showed all the entities gathering, their curved appendages pointing toward a single date. When I calculated it in our modern calendar, my heart nearly stopped. That date is exactly 3 weeks from today. The first sign that they knew I was piecing it together came at 3:47 a.m. last Tuesday. My computer screen suddenly flickered to life, displaying coordinates in that same ancient numerical system from the cave paintings. I tried convincing myself I'd just fallen asleep at my desk until I noticed my printer spitting out pages of symbols identical to those in my grandmother's diary. The coordinates led to locations around my city where children had vanished between 1952 and 1989. But here's what makes my hands shake as I record this. Each location now hosts a new construction project, and when viewed from above, these buildings form the exact pattern I found in that hidden cave painting. 2 days later, I started receiving emails from an address that changed with each message, consisting only of numbers that seemed random at first. But when I overlaid them with the genetic sequences found at disappearance sites, they matched perfectly. Someone, or something, was confirming my worst fears about what these entities were selecting us for. The symbols began appearing closer to home. First, etched into the frost on my car windshield, precise, geometric patterns that matched the warnings in prehistoric art. Then I found them carved into the tree outside my bedroom window. The cuts were fresh, still seeping sap, but my security camera footage showed no one approaching the tree. Just a tall shadow that seemed to bend in impossible ways. I set up recording equipment around my house, more out of desperation than hope. The first few nights caught nothing. Then, 3 nights ago, every device picked up the same sound at exactly 3:33 a.m., a low-frequency hum that, when analyzed, contained buried audio patterns matching the phonetic structure of that ancient language I'd discovered. But what I recorded last night changes everything. I was reviewing the security footage when I noticed a distortion in the corner of my living room. When I enhanced the audio, beneath the static, I heard my grandmother's voice reciting names. Names I found in missing persons reports from the 1940s. These weren't recordings. This was happening in real time. The shadows in my house don't move naturally anymore. They stretch toward me when I walk past, forming curves and hooks that vanish when I try to photograph them. My motion sensors go off at the same time every night, detecting movement in empty rooms. The cameras show nothing, but the temperature drops so drastically that frost forms on the inside of my windows, always in those same mathematical patterns. Yesterday, I found my grandmother's diary open on my desk, but I'd locked it in a safe across town. The page it was open to contained a passage I'd never seen before, in handwriting that looked like hers, but somehow wasn't. When they decide you're ready to know, the evidence finds you. Each sign is a test, each pattern a choice. The curved ones aren't watching you. They're waiting for you to understand why they chose our bloodline. An hour ago, my phone received a text with just one image. A photograph from 1943 showing my grandmother as a child, standing in front of her house. But in my background research, I'd seen this exact photo before, and I know with absolute certainty that the tall, curved figure standing behind her wasn't in the original. I can hear something moving through my house as I record this. The shadows beneath my door are twisting into familiar patterns. My recorder is picking up that same hum, but this time it's forming words in a language I'm starting to understand. They're not just watching me piece this together, they're waiting for me to accept what I'm becoming. Because I finally realize why my grandmother stopped writing in her diary that winter. She didn't end her investigation. She joined them. Everything I thought I knew about the Hookman legend was deliberately engineered, not to hide the truth, but to keep humanity from understanding its true purpose. The stories about hooks and murdered teenagers weren't meant to scare us. They were meant to make us look away from something far more terrifying. We've never been alone, and we've never been in control. Last night, I found the missing pieces in the most unlikely place, a sealed vault in an abandoned mental institution. Inside were hundreds of interviews with survivors who encountered these entities. But these weren't the sanitized versions they later told the police. These were their original testimonies, raw and unfiltered, before they were forced to change their stories. The first interview was with Michael Chen, a researcher who disappeared for 6 months in 1967. When they found him, he had carved those same symbols all over his cell walls. "They showed me everything," he wrote. "The hooks aren't for killing. They're anchors, holding together the fabric of reality. They select those who can bear the weight of knowing." Sarah Mitchell's revised testimony revealed why she changed her original story. "They didn't threaten me," her sealed statement read. "They showed me what would happen if humanity learned the truth too soon. I saw cities tear themselves apart as people realized what the selections really meant. It's not about death, it's about what comes after." Then I found Project Shepherd's true purpose. It wasn't a research initiative, it was a containment protocol. Governments worldwide had been working together since World War I to suppress the truth. Not because they feared the entities, but because they feared how humanity would react to discovering our true role in their grand design. The classified files contained photographs of ancient tablets found beneath the Vatican. They told of beings who emerged before each great extinction event in Earth's history, selecting species to shepherd through the coming darkness. Humanity wasn't their first project. We were just the first ones capable of understanding our own selection process. A hidden addendum to my grandmother's diary finally revealed why some bloodlines were chosen. "We're not special," she wrote in code I only just learned to decipher. "We're necessary. Every person they select becomes part of a living network spreading across time and space. The curved ones aren't choosing who lives or dies, they're choosing who becomes like them. The suppression wasn't about hiding their existence. It was about hiding their purpose until humanity was ready to understand." Each urban legend, each twisted version of the story, was carefully crafted to keep us from seeing the pattern. They appear before every major shift in human history because they're preparing us for the biggest shift of all. In a forgotten archive in Moscow, I found recordings of an interrogation from 1989. A survivor spoke for 6 hours straight in that ancient language before finally revealing in English, "The hooks are keys, and we are locks, waiting to be turned." They've been preparing bloodlines for centuries, creating a network of human anchors for what's coming. Yesterday, I received a package with no return address. Inside was a single photograph showing every person who'd ever investigated the Hookman legend and lived to tell about it. We were all connected, not by chance, but by design. Each of us had been selected, tested, and changed. The curved ones weren't hunting us, they were recruiting us. The most terrifying truth isn't that they exist, or that they've been selecting us for centuries. It's that everything, every story, every sighting, every disappearance has been leading to this moment. The legends weren't meant to warn us about them, they were meant to prepare us for becoming them. And now, as I write this, I understand why my grandmother stopped trying to expose the truth. The curved appendage growing from my right arm isn't a curse or a transformation, it's an inheritance. We aren't their victims or their witnesses, we're their successors. The Hookman legend isn't ending, it's evolving. And those of us they've selected, we're not just going to tell the story anymore, we're going to become it. They're outside my door right now. I can see their curved silhouettes through the frosted glass, waiting. But I need to finish this, to tell you what I've learned, because soon I won't be able to tell it in a way you'll understand. 3 days ago, I received an unmarked envelope containing photographs of every researcher who's ever investigated the Hookman legend. Each image showed them in their final moments of humanity, their right arms beginning to curve and elongate, their shadows stretching in impossible directions. On the back of each photo was written the same warning: some doors can't be closed once open. The figures in my peripheral vision aren't hallucinations. They're my predecessors, watching to ensure I complete the transformation they all underwent. Every time I turn my head, they're closer. Their curved appendages seem to bend reality itself, creating spaces in my home that shouldn't exist. Last night, I saw my own reflection split into multiple versions of myself, each one at a different stage of what I'm becoming. The warnings came from others like me, those in the middle stages of transformation. Anonymous texts appearing on phones that shouldn't work, emails that delete themselves after reading, voices through static on unplugged radios, all saying the same thing: you can still walk away, but if you share what you know, you'll become part of the pattern forever. But walking away isn't an option anymore. The changes have already begun. My right arm aches with deep primal pain. When I sleep, I dream in that ancient language, seeing through eyes that perceive time as a physical dimension we can touch and bend. I understand now why the others changed their stories, not out of fear, but because human language can't describe what we become. The true nature of the Hookman isn't some urban legend about a killer stalking lovers' lanes. It's a transformation that's been happening since the dawn of humanity, chosen individuals becoming part of an ancient network of guardians who exist outside of conventional time and space. We're not meant to stop disasters or save everyone. We're meant to ensure the right people survive to maintain the complex tapestry of human existence. My grandmother's final diary entry makes sense now. She wrote, "The hook isn't a weapon, it's an anchor in the fabric of reality." We become the shepherds because humanity needs guides who can see beyond the present, who can reach through time and gently curve the path of history. As I record this, my shadow has started moving independently of my body. The curved ones outside have begun their synchronized movement, the same pattern I've seen in every piece of evidence throughout history. They're not here to stop me from sharing this. They're here to complete my integration into their ranks. I need you to understand why I'm sharing this despite knowing the price. This isn't just about revealing the truth, it's about preparing you for what's coming. The Hookman legend isn't a warning about death or danger. It's a signal to those who are ready to see beyond the veil of ordinary reality, to understand that some of us must become something else to ensure humanity's survival. The pain in my arm has reached its peak. I can feel the bones elongating, the flesh reshaping itself into that familiar curve I've seen in countless images. My perception is splitting into multiple timelines. I can see every possible version of this moment stretching out before me like branches of an infinite tree. This will be my last recording as a fully human being. Soon, I'll join the others, becoming part of the eternal watch that has guarded humanity since we first looked up at the stars and wondered about our place in the universe. The next time you hear stories about a tall figure with a curved arm watching from the shadows, know this: we're not hunting, we're protecting, we're selecting, we're guiding. And somewhere out there, right now, another researcher is starting to ask the right questions, beginning the cycle anew. Because the Hookman legend isn't just a story, it's a recruitment call that echoes through time itself. Remember my words, but more importantly, remember what happens when you start looking too deeply into the shadows. Sometimes the shadows look back, sometimes they invite you to join them. And sometimes, like me, you realize that becoming the monster is the most human thing you can do. If you've watched this far, you're already part of it. The curved ones know who accesses this information. They've been tracking these revelations since humanity first learned to share stories. But I need to give you one final warning. Not to keep you safe, but to help you recognize when you've been chosen. Watch your shadows carefully in the coming days. If they begin to move a fraction of a second after you do, it's starting. If you notice impossible angles in the corners of your room, or catch glimpses of curved silhouettes that vanish when you turn to look at them, don't run. They're not hunting you. They're measuring your readiness. Pay attention to your dreams. When you start understanding words in a language you've never learned, when you see patterns in the stars that shouldn't be there, when you wake up with knowledge that no human should possess, these aren't signs of madness. They're signs of your selection. The urban legends you grew up with, the stories that kept you awake at night, they were never meant to frighten you. They were meant to prepare you. Every culture, every civilization has its own version of the curved ones. We created these stories not to warn future generations about the danger, but to help them recognize the invitation when it comes. Check your family history. Look for the patterns: unexplained disappearances, strange journals, relatives who vanished only to return changed. If you find these breadcrumbs, you're likely part of a bloodline they've been cultivating for generations. The hook isn't just coming for you, it's been waiting for you. Here's what they never tell you in the stories. The real horror isn't in being taken. It's in realizing that you've been chosen for something beyond human comprehension, and that you'll walk willingly into that transformation when it comes. As I record this final warning, my transformation is almost complete. I can see through time now. Watch as thousands of you discover this video across different timelines. Some of you will dismiss it as fiction. Others will recognize the truth in your bones. And a select few, you'll feel something stir in your right arm, a phantom pain that whispers of what you might become. To those who are already seeing the signs, don't try to document it. Don't try to prove it. When your shadow starts to curve, when you hear the ancient language in the static between radio stations, when you notice the mathematical patterns appearing in your daily life, accept it. Understanding will come with the change. For everyone else, keep telling the Hookman story. Keep spreading the legend. Not because it's just a story, but because every time it's told, it helps prepare the next generation of guardians. Every whispered warning about a curved figure in the darkness is another strand in the web that holds reality together. And if you wake up one night to find impossible shadows stretching across your walls, if you see a tall figure whose right arm curves in ways that defy physics, if you feel the weight of ancient knowledge pressing against your consciousness, remember my words. Remember that some of us must become the very things we feared to ensure humanity's survival through the darkness that's coming. This isn't the end of the story. It's not even the end of my story. Somewhere out there right now, another person is starting to ask questions about what really lurks in the shadows. Another piece is being moved into place. Another transformation is beginning. So the next time you hear rustling in the dark, the next time you catch a glimpse of something curved and impossible in your peripheral vision, ask yourself this: Are you really seeing a monster? Or are you seeing what you're destined to become?